So, who of you enjoy the procurement process? I mean, you send through documentation, it takes ages to get through. And who's always blamed? Poor legal, because they just get a dump load of documents sent to them. I'm Craig, I'm from GTconsult, and I'm going to be taking you through some of our AI agents to help you with something just like this. Today, we're going to be looking at the contracting process in procurement. So I will send through a contract to an organization. What normally happens is the legal department will then go through the contract and see whether it meets all of the provisions for working with them. So they will do a check of a number of different clauses that must be mandatory in order to interact with them. So we're going to automate that process using AI and using an assessment tool as a agentic AI agent that can automatically deal with the document when it arrives within our organization, saving us a whole lot of time in terms of legal having to go through the document, but rather sending legal the assessment that it's done so that legal can update that document. So massive change in productivity. So let's see how we've built this and jump straight into the code. Okay, so we're going to start off in Copilot Studio, our great area where we are going to build this agentic agent. And the thing that we love about this is that we prompt it, and it's building workflow with prompts, which makes it so much easier to deal with, but intelligent workflows, not just A to B, but A to B via the rest of the alphabet. In this case, it's a contract governance advisor, and our description has been that the contract governance advisor assesses new service provider contracts based on the GT governance framework, and we identify potential risks, missing clauses, suggested mandatory updates, etc. One of the key words there is the GT governance framework. What do we have problems with AI? Well, we've got problems with people not being able to prompt, firstly, which is not their fault. They talk to AI in very much the fashion that they would talk to anyone else. It's natural language. But when we are wanting a consistent result, we need to talk in a very specific manner to AI, and that's where prompt engineering comes in. As said previously, one of the tricks that you can do here is actually asking your LLM what you should prompt based on what you're trying to achieve, and then you refine that prompt from there. It's a great way to start your prompting experience if you don't know a whole bunch of the tricks beforehand. So in terms of our general instructions, we look at things like the assessment. So assess the completeness of the contract wording for the provided contract using this GT governance laws document that we've spoken about. And this assessment should identify all areas of the document that are potentially missing based on the best practices in the document. But now a document might refer to a clause that it has, but the wording in our governance framework is slightly different. And this is where the AI comes in. It assesses the wording itself, and it does that. It says the assessment should ascertain whether existing clauses provide the same protection as the GT governance framework. So it's putting its hat on as a legal advisor, saying, okay, this is the idea behind the clause. Is there a similar clause in the opposing contract that has the same meaning, but it's worded differently? Once it's done that, it sends off that email to the legal team, including the name of the service provider, the assessment, and a list of suggested clauses to add to the document within SharePoint. Now, we utilize orchestration here so that the agentic agent knows what it can do. It asks itself questions, it figures out what it's meant to be doing behind the scenes. In our agent, we also have a contracts playbook area. This, you'll notice with the little icon, is sitting within SharePoint. So within our SharePoint, we've got the GT governance laws sitting in the contract playbook area. And if we have a look at this document, you'll notice here that it covers a number of items such as POPIA information, termination of breach, dispute resolution, jurisdiction, and governing the laws. All very technical terms, and based off of those, we've got a number of different examples of what those clauses should entail. Now, this becomes our knowledge base. We turn off the capabilities to search the internet because we're not interested in generic contracts that this LLM might have been trained on. We want to know specifically the information according to our playbook and the clauses that we're looking for. This solves our second problem of agentic AI, which is where hallucinations happen. If you ask enough questions that the chatbot does not know the answer to, at some point it's going to hallucinate and make up information information. This is not what you want, especially in this case. You want this to be very precise, and therefore it's only looking at our documentation. In terms of the tools, these are actions that can be called by the agentic agent. So it figures out, okay, I've done the assessment. What do I need to do now? Well, I want to send an email. So it'll send the email off. That email might have dynamic information in it, like the assessment, or it might have static information, like the legal team's email address. And you can configure those on an action by action basis. So if we go and have a look at this tool, you'll see here it says send an email. It's using Office 365 Outlook action to send that email. And quite importantly, the first time you do this, you need to authenticate your user that is going to be sending that email. You'll see it as soon as you run the agent. But then we get to our inputs. So in this case, sending it to me because I want it to come to me so I can show it to you. We can put in a subject line, which we're putting in a custom value, but the body of the email should be dynamically filled with what AI has picked up in this process. So the beauty there is we can have a mixture of information that can either be dynamically generated or it can be static information like the Craig and the subject line. We also have a trigger. Now in a lot of our examples, the trigger starts off on a timed basis or it's called through an API. In this case, we're looking for a file being dropped in SharePoint. So very different here, but a nice use case scenario because this is something that can happen quite often. You drop a file somewhere, you want some action to happen, well, just like a workflow kicking off in Power Automate, it's actually what it's doing here. So we've got a trigger that is sitting watching a file repository. And when I say it's Power Automate, I'm not kidding. If we click on Edit in Power Automate or Edit, you'll see that you can open this up in Power Automate. What this does is it reads the contents of the file and then kicks into the process. So let's have a look at this running. I haven't published it at the moment. I'm going to run it in a test trigger. And what this does is it looks at any of the files that have been dropped there and it highlights that this action has happened. So if you don't have any of these triggers available, go do the action that you need. If you need to have a trigger, well, you can kick that off manually. If you need to look for a document that's landing in the document library, go and drop a document in there and you'll notice that one of these dates rocks up because that's a document that has been dropped into our document library. I'm going to start testing. So this is mimicking the action of this kicking off. It would kick off if I just dropped a document in there if that agentic AI is published. What you'll see here is that a trigger has been detected. Now, within that trigger, you'll see all of the contents of a document that has been dropped into my document library. In fact, it basically pulls out that information here. It's actually showing you what it's doing in terms of the agentic agent, and it's saying, oh, sending off an email to Craig, and it's identifying exactly what needs to be done using that orchestration. So it's figured out the data, it's sent an email to Craig with the subject line, and here's our table of the assessment. So what does that look like in an email? Let's go and actually open an example of one of those up. So here we've got our table. It's looking for a clause around POP here for termination on breach, for dispute resolution, and for jurisdiction and governing laws. Well, didn't we just see that in our governance framework? Of course we did. So it's having a look at the assessment of the contract that I've uploaded. It's telling me the risk level, and it is telling me whether there are suggested clauses based on the information. Well, obviously the one that I uploaded was good enough that it's got most of the information in here, and you can see the risk is low. However, it does also say there are potentially missing clauses. So the confidentiality clause, whilst the contract mentions personal information, it does not explicitly include a general confidentiality clause covering all confidential information exchanged between the parties. And here's a suggested clause that we can add in. Now, you could build this out in workflow, but it would be exceptionally hard to do that assessment. So what the AI agent is doing is it's opening up our document from SharePoint. It's comparing that with the contract that it received, and then giving us these suggestions by looking at the data and presenting the suggestions with the clauses. And it's doing that intelligence. You can see here the response is actually carefully monitoring what has been made available versus what could be possible, and that is the suggested clause. Also linked to that document. So if this was going to our legal team, they could open up the document sitting in SharePoint, they could make the applicable changes and send it off, saving a load of time in terms of ability to assess a document themselves. here, build a bunch of rules that the tools do it for you. So here, AI is making you more productive, allowing you to focus on the much more meaningful tasks within your work. Hopefully that helps. We'll catch you next time here from GT. Cheers.